7 p.m. And we want to call the meeting to order of the St. Augustine Historical Society annual meeting. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could make it. I know we had a little change of plans from earlier with Tuesday. We lost some folks, but we got a good turnout tonight. So we're going to move on to the business part and get to the entertaining part. So the minutes were distributed. Well, first of all, I guess for you who don't know, my name is Thomas Jackson, president of the St. Augustine Historical Society, and this is my first full year as president. So I'm learning a little bit more as we go along. But the minutes were distributed on the way in, and I wanted to, at this point, have an approval for the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion, and it was second. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposition? Okay, no opposition. Okay, at this point, I'm going to bring up our treasurer. Nick is in the house, and he's going to give us a treasurer's report about financial and fiscal situation.
I think we did it.
Hello. We'll start together here. We have a great turnout, as Tom said, and I'm really impressed by how many people are interested in the treasurer's report. But it occurs to me that since you're here, you might as well stay. Our speakers have to anyway, so I'm going to go quickly through my part. Which I know someone really objects to that. And if there are any questions, I'm not going to get into any details, I don't think. If there are any questions about the budget or our finances, that sort of thing, feel free to get a hold of me or Megan, certainly. And we'd be happy to talk about it and give you some more information. But, so I'll go through this a bit. There it is. Okay, I only have 3 slides, if you happen to know. Basically, this is just a real quick summary. The part on the side and this side, which is kind of grayed out, is the previous fiscal year, and the rest of it is the fiscal year that we'll talk about tonight. As I and other treasurers have mentioned through the years, we've had a kind of a unusual system where most of our business, including elections officers, such like, happen on a calendar year basis, a typical January through December basis. The budget has been done on a 1st of July to end of June basis for as long as most of anybody can remember. What we decided to try to do is fix that, and we couldn't find any good reason not to do it, so we decided to go ahead and do it. We talked to our CPA, Todd Neville, and he said that he's done that for a number of organizations in the last few years. It just never makes sense. It's always confusing, and I'll try to not be confusing, but I probably will be. When you have a fiscal year that ends, this will have happened at the end of June. I'll be talking about something that happened at the end of June. So it's really kind of old news in a way. But anyway, after I get finished here, there'll be a motion to change the bylaws so that from now on, starting in next January, we'll have our year match up, jive up with the calendar year. So hopefully, that was something that was brought up and supported by the Board of Trustees earlier this fall. And so it's because it is a bylaw change, it needs to have a vote here in support of it. So campaign, we will vote yes on that. Anyway, so what we're talking about here, the part in yellow and white there is the fiscal year that ended the end of June in 2023. Basically, it was a pretty good year, not quite as good from a financial standpoint, but basically, okay. I'd say give it I don't know, a 7, maybe. Anyway, a couple of items. The expenses were higher than we thought, were intended more than we budgeted, more than the previous year. In fact, more than it's ever been. We apparently hope that it will be lower again this year. The main culprit really was storms. We were hit, if you remember, to be back in the summer of 22, we were hit by back-to-back hurricanes. And it didn't do a tremendous amount of damage, but we did quite a bit to, unfortunately, the lobbyist house. And the lobbyist house is one of the buildings that is not owned by the Historical Society, but under our purview. So we're responsible for keeping it up to date as much as we can. There's quite a bit of damage to it. It's back online, it's back rentable, if anybody wants to rent it, it's available. But it's had quite a bit of damage, and that was an expensive process. Hopefully will be refunded. It's a long process that Megan is executive director to go through to talk to FEMA and go through the city and such like, particularly with FEMA trying to explain that you can't fix things up in a several 100-year-old coquina building like and a lot of other a lot of the rules and regulations for that sort of thing just don't apply to a coquina building. And it took a bit of education or re-education, whatever, for FEMA to get that through. And it's still up in the air. We have been promised that we'll have some reimbursement. But anyway, that's a big part of the cost. So I just wanted to explain that briefly. On the other hand, our income was quite good. It was higher than we had budgeted by about 9.5%, 9%. We were pretty optimistic with what we thought our income was going to be this past year, but it was actually better than that. We're grateful to that. In fact, it's going ahead good now, as a little preview. When we did our budget for this current fiscal year, which once again started last July and goes till the end of June, the board comes up with a new budget, works through a new budget with a lot of help from the staff, from the executive director, and back in May when we came up with a new budget, we had expected, based on the previous year, a very good year as far as getting extra income. And we could have been about another 10% increase in the amount of money of income. And that's important because we have to balance out a couple of different things. One of them is inflation, of course. And we're very aware of the effect of that in the staff and the fact that the staff needs to have some kind of amelioration dealing with inflation. In fact, in the last 2 years, it's been a total of about an 8% increase of staff based on that. So there's costs involved there. There also are a real effort. I think we mentioned it in the past that we go to the next survey. If it works. It works. Wow.
You can do it, I can.
No? Yeah, that's what we got. Oh, sorry. This is a slide similar to what I used last year, basically discussing the investment fund. And I was, essentially gave, my sales and oil sketches of RTE way back about 15 years ago. And it gave us really the first time a really sizable amount of money to fall back on, and in case rainy day fund, and also to take care of a lot of issues, paying ahead with grants and a number of different things. But one of the things that the board decided several years ago was to basically invest a certain amount of that money actively every year in the actual functioning of the society, with the idea that that's what we're here for, and we want to have as good a society as we can. And in a number of different areas, salaries are one. We have it's a matter of fairness. We want to pay people at least the average for the kind of job that they're doing, and work from there. But basically, we'd like to have a well-paid staff because it's fair and it's also very practical. It's a lot easier to you want to keep people that are good. You want to pay them and support them. So that we're using some of the funds for that. We're also using some to upgrade our technology. And that's particularly important at the library and the parts of the society that are involved in storage of data and making data available, not only to people who come to the library or the society, but also on a remote basis. And we're able to do that partially because of technology to give special access for members. And if you aren't aware of some of these member-only activities, that's something you can certainly ask about and check on. But anyway, a lot of that costs money. But we have to upgrade our storage, we have to improve storage, data storage, and again, that costs money and something we want to continue to support as time goes on. And we also, of course, have maintenance issues with buildings. Anybody who has an older building here, there are a lot of older buildings here, know that it's kind of an endless process, and that's a money issue. And I'm pretty sure that the society buildings are in as good shape, with possible exception of the lobbyists right now, as good shape as they've ever been. And I think that's something we be really happy about. We don't really want to defer maintenance. That's sort of something that happens all too often, and it usually ends up turning around and biting you. So it's, we want to avoid that. All that stuff costs money, and so when we're looking at this fund, we are spending some of the money, but we also realize we need to balance that out with some more income. And one of the things that one of the issues that started coming up this year was that we can't really, we want to extrapolate down the road. We want to have enough money to continue to be able to support the activities of the society. So we don't want to use that money up. In other words, we want to have it there. We want to use it expeditiously, and that requires that we take another look, a better look at how we fund things and how we bring income in. And as I said, we've been able to raise income quite nicely the last couple of years, but we need to continue to do that. And one of the initiatives that happened this year, and Megan and Thomas were the lead in that, and setting up a new committee of the board, and we had the board and some other members of the panel. We're taking a long-range look at the different ways that we can change the way we fund or enhance the way we fund the society. So that's something to just think about down the road, and look there'll be more about that later, I'm sure, as we go along. This is just a very quick, this is my last slide, it's a very quick, note on a couple of outstanding financial issues or things that have come up in this past fiscal year. The top group there is green, it's kind of green, or expenses that have come up. And I mentioned most of this already, the hurricanes, the families, and so on. There's some little numbers to put behind it. Down in the blue section on the income side, and this is something we take a look at, we think of as the visitor line items. Admissions, the sales at the museum store, to a certain extent, weddings have all in the past in fiscal 23, all did very well. I mean, quite a bit higher. And as you can see, they're the highest in a number of years, in some cases. Admissions the highest in the last 12 years. So, we've not only rebounded somewhat from, or a lot from COVID and some conditions, but also are really coming along and doing very well. Memberships also, actually right now we have the highest amount of membership of income that the society has ever had. And, that's also very good to me. Just a little bit down at the bottom there in yellow, a little bit of preview for the first part of this year, just to mention it briefly. We do have some extra expenses in bookkeeping and CPA dealing with, we're reviewing our cash handling system, something that people have to do every few years. We've got a new online version of QuickBooks, which will allow us to have a lot more rapid and right up to date access to how things are going with the books, which is useful. The weddings, unfortunately, have been lagging a little bit this fall, but we hope that they'll be rebounding. And the other thing I just very quickly want to mention is the number of community outreach organizations that we've connected up with. I went through like a list based on the last 2 or 3 years, and I found 27 different local organizations that we have either partnered with for a program or tied in one way or another with some kind of a program or activity here, either here or there, depending on the situation. And it makes a big difference. And it makes a lot of sense for organizations. We're very happy that we're in the city that has a lot of those, I think it includes all of these organizations as well as themselves, and also has a practical side. When we host something with a group that hasn't normally come here for a while, come back, not here, but to the grounds of the old palace, we invariably get donations and new members. And, it's not a coincidence that happened. That's all I have to say.
We want to thank you, Nick, for that report. We want to thank Nick. He's done a great job as treasurer for a number of years. And, I always have challenges with numbers. And I admire individuals who can deal with those numbers and make them come alive for you. At this point, I want to take a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
So.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Okay, no opposition. Thank you very much, Mr. McCall, the treasurer. Hopefully you'll be around for the next other year. Okay, I'm just lobbying for you now. The next item on our agenda is we have 2 committee reports. We had 2 committees that actually went out and did work on 2 different items that we have to present to you tonight. The first is the nominating committee. Oh, Well, okay, well, we can do that first. I have, constitutional proposed changes to the bylaw. We can move on the fly. Actually, this was, Nick explained it pretty much in his report. This is a way of changing our fiscal year from July 1 to June 30. We're gonna change that to January 1st to December 31st. And this section, where is it? I'm gonna read that information exactly the way it is. Okay, the Article 8, Finances, Section 1, Fiscal Year. The current text of the bylaws is the fiscal year shall be July 1 through June 30. And the simultaneous Historical Society proposes to change the fiscal year. And we're going to change it from July 1, June 30, to reflect the calendar year January 1st to December 31st. And that's beginning January 1st, 2025. So basically in January 1st, 2025, we'll close out a 6-month year, then reopen into a full 1 year to from January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2025. So the change shall read in the bylaw, the fiscal year shall be January 1 to December 31st. So that's the proposal from the bylaws committee. Any, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second, I have a motion and a second. Okay, any discussion on that motion? And we got the reasoning from our treasurer earlier. So that's sufficient. All those in favor say aye. Any opposition? No opposition. Unanimous. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next committee that worked very diligently with our nominating committee. And our nominating committee, basically the nominating committee reached out for other candidates to replace outgoing candidates. And two individuals will be going off of the board. And for the first term, the Historical Society Board of Trustees approved the following slate of candidates as nominees to the membership of the board. And for the first term, recommendation is for Marcia Biles. You know, most of you know Marcia Biles. Her and her husband, they operate the Raider Castle. And Dr. Wayne Riggs, professor here at Flagler College. And nominated for a second term is Don Crislow, who currently serves as vice president, and Dr. Kelly Enright, who is a professor here at Flagler College as well. So that is the recommendation from the nominating committee. So can I get a motion for the nominating committee report to be accepted?
So moved.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I think we have, if we take nominations from the floor, you would have already had to turn in 10 days prior. So no, if there is any that will be turned in, then they okay. So it's really close to those individuals. So all those in favor say aye. Any opposition? No opposition. I was thinking maybe Marcia Wayne might oppose. Okay, so those fact the nomination committee report is accepted. Those two individuals couldn't be here tonight. They could have been here Tuesday night, right? But they couldn't be here tonight. And but they are already accepted if they were approved and they're part of the Board of Trustees. At this point, I wanna, is that the, list of,
That was our 2024 list.
this is the new board of trustees for 2024 to 2025. Okay. And I want to thank the outgoing trustee, basically, Dr. Jim Cusick, professor at the University of Florida, and Dr. Wes King, who's a professor here at Flagler College. They did a great job in providing input for us. It's a little story about Dr. Cusick. I was over at the University of Florida, and it was doing a change of classes. And it was students everywhere. I mean, it was hundreds and thousands basically all over the place. And I walked right into it. Of all the people I walked into, I said, hey, stop, can you do something for me? And he said, okay, sure, I did. But it's just, it was kind of divine intervention. We just try to teach them. At this point, I'm gonna, I guess, have a little bit of remarks, but I'm gonna introduce someone later. But I just want to reflect, you know, as a reflect on my first 4 years as president of the society. I must say it's been an eye-opening experience for me. As ex officio member of all the committees, I tried to go to all the meetings, all the committee meetings, all the events. I just couldn't keep up with it. There's so much going on. It's so much, it's so rich organization, that there's so much happening that it's almost impossible to go to everything and be at every event. But that's a testimony to what the organization is all about. But I do realize the level of commitment for each trustee in their respective roles. They've been diligently providing for the organization and providing their service, and there's no pay involved, and it's volunteer for everybody. So I want to thank the trustees that serve and the ones that volunteer to serve. The organization was founded in 1883, but it was formally organized in 1953. And I understand that one of our members here reminded me of that tonight. Excel Pelletier was one of the founding members in 1953. But the trustees will continue to support and assist the organization to perform its stated mission. Now, it goes without saying that the staff of the society is one of the best I've had the pleasure of working with. Their professionalism can be measured against any others in the area. So thank you, staff. Now, under the leadership of our executive director, Megan Chief, he sets the standard for success. Our research, building, and office staff as well as all of the numerous volunteers who help keep the ship afloat. We say thank you for helping to successfully continue the mission of the society. There are many moving parts to this mission of ours, and I have intentionally not mentioned the numerous outside contributions to the society for the fear of leaving someone out. But you know who you are. And to you, I say thank you. You know who you are. As we move forward and begin a new year, we have the opportunity to expand our reach, not necessarily geographically, but in the scope of our audience. As Nick reported earlier, we are fiscally sound, and with the initiative of a long-term sustainability effort, we can ensure the longevity of our mission. Opportunities will become available on the state, regional, and national level to tell the history of 450 plus years of St. Augustine. To engage more of the public, to participate in this mission of ours, and reaffirm our commitment to do more in 24. So we can come alive in 25. But at this time, I want to bring up one of our hardest working directors I know, our very own Megan Ortiz, for her report. Good day. There you
Well, thank you all for joining us this evening, and thank you all for scrambling to be here, 2 days. And I really want to also thank Flagler College, Dr. Wayne Riggs, Christine Rodenbach, and Flagler College Catering, because they really truly did scramble to make the space available for us. So thank you very much for making that happen. As Nick McCullough mentioned, I think about 2019, the Board of Trustees of the Historical Society made the decision to invest in the society. And so we are seeing the real results from that here 5 years later. And I just wanted to go through a little bit of what we've been up to. And then I know you're not here to see my mug tonight, so I will make this quick and get out of the way for the main event. But we started offering the oldest city. That was an announcement that we made this time last year. Dr. Susan Parker's column that has been with the record for many, many years is now an exclusive membership benefit. And it's been wonderful. It's bi-weekly, so members get to do that. We've teamed up with our reenactment groups, and we will be hosting them as well this year to do the School of the Century, 16th Century, and Drake's Raid. We love it. They come onto the property, they really bring it to life. And it's really, really brought in a lot of more people to our properties, to our space to take interest in what we do. We've also teamed up with some Menorcan organizations last year. We always host the Menorcan Cultural Society celebration, which we held at the oldest house. But we also did some other different unique things with some Menorcan groups. We had a wonderful exhibit that Dr. Darian Andrew put together on Stephen Benet. And we also hosted some Menorcan artists this year as well. The Surf Culture Museum has continued to produce a lot of collaborations. And one of those is we have the 2nd annual surf celebration, which is Flagler College. The really cool thing about that is that it's gotten students heavily involved. And they put this on, they do a fashion show, they come onto the property. Flagler students all attend, and it's really been well received and just a lot of fun. We even have some of those the old cars show up, and it's a lot of fun. We've also reached out and started doing a lot with classes, full classes. So there's a couple of times that we've had full classes work with us. This one in particular, in our Glory, Black Joy, and the Jim Crow of St. Augustine, Chris Balatek is a professor here, and his class worked on it for the semester. And that's made them really able to get their work out there and get the public to see it. And it's also something to put on their resume and put on their portfolios when they graduate. Nicole Diem is sitting in the front row. She is one of our rock star librarians, and she has also become our curator in the last year. She's been putting together a number of really cool exhibits. If you have not been to the oldest house recently, we are changing these up with semesters. We're kind of working with the schools to do them per semester. Please come and visit us. The upstairs of Tovar has become a really exciting rotating exhibit space. We've also taken part in History Festival. I don't know if everybody here is familiar with that. It kicked off 2 years ago. We'll be in our 3rd year this year. It takes place in May. It's really exciting. I think it's something like 20-something organizations, local organizations gathered together to bring History Fest to town. And a lot of, what we do in St. Augustine is catered to the tourism industry. But this one's really about our citizens, our residents of St. Johns County. So if you haven't taken advantage of History Fest, please do. Our speaker series started off with Dr. Michael Francis. We had Dr. Christine Miller talk to us about medicinal practices. Then we had Dr. Barbara Maddox. This is a really interesting topic, teaching in black and white. about Sisters of St. Joe. We had Andre Fittino. He's a graphic novelist who's also a Flagler grad. That was something a little unique and different. He did a whole series on St. Augustine. If you haven't seen it, it's a really cool graphic novel that he wrote about St. Augustine. And we had Dr. Chip Bragg, who came and talked to us about Patriots in Exile. And then we rounded it out with Dr. Graham talking to us about Valiant Soldiers. We put out a few publications this year. This is called Shrimply Delightful. It's just a lot of fun. We've got it for sale. Charles Tingley happened to run across in 1936. There was a shrimp cooking contest here. And the Versaggi family actually judged it. We found over 50 of these recipes and consolidated them into this little booklet. It's a lot of fun. I don't recommend you use a lot of it because it is Great Depression era. So they get very creative with some of the ingredients. Valiant Soldiers, Dr. Graham, just put that out, published that, and we're really excited about that as well. That was our latest issue with Alistair Barnum. We held the Herschel Shepherd Award, and we honored Tim Smith this past year in May for all of he's done for historic preservation. We also worked with the Lighthouse for reciprocated. We held an event for the Lighthouse in October, I think, of 22, and then they reciprocated with an event for us. And we hope going forward to continue to do these kinds of partnerships. Nicole Diem and I were invited to the National Council on Public History to present on the Surf Museum Creating Community. So we really were excited to get that out there, be a part of that. That took place in Atlanta, Georgia this year as well. Robert Covert, I know he's here. There he is in the back. He's another one of our rock star librarians. He did stories of service. He collected oral histories of his own. He also consolidated some oral histories from the LOC, from the St. John County Public Library System, and now they've all been consolidated into one location with some fantastic photographs with them as well. So please check that out. Stories of Service and Serve are both on what we call Omeka. And if you have not checked them out, they're free to the public, they're open, and they have a lot of really great things on them. We've also opened up some of these things to St. John County school system to make sure that they have access to all of these materials as well. Nick talked a little bit about this, but I just wanted to kind of let you know what we've been up to as far as reaching out and getting out there. We've created a really robust program, and it's taken off. We have interns, as you can see, from various fields of study. We work closely with the Flagler College Honors Program. And even 2 of our interns last year were invited to 2 different national conferences with the work that they did with the St. Augustine Historical Society. So like I said, we are really trying to create these internships that give them something to put in their portfolio that really can give them something, a little bit of a step up when they graduate to get back, out into the working field. The other thing is it's also given us some really great staff members. 2 of our latest staff members that are at the library are Flagler College grads who came to us as interns. I myself was an intern for Dr. Susan Parker. I think it was in 2008 or 9. So, internships do in fact work. They are extremely beneficial, and I highly recommend it. We've also reached out to some local historical societies to help them with whatever their needs are. Nicole Dan's really kind of taking the reins there and, helping with their digital content, helping them with whatever they need as well. So we're trying to share that. And then, of course, if you can see some of our collaborations and partnerships over the last few years, we really are trying to work with everybody. We feel like, when we do that, we're only getting better information out there to the public. And one of the things that the library's been really good at is the Archives Club. We have so many different organizations, historic organizations in St. Augustine, that they formed a club and go visit each other, go see what everyone else's archives are holding, so we can compare. And again, so we can give the best history out there. So we know what we're doing. With that, we will be. I wanted to give you guys just, a little bit of analytics. Because like we said, investing in society, we put a lot into that new membership database. We put a lot into, digital space. And so as you can see, it's been effective. I mean, it's really increased our visitation by 200%. People are continuing to come back. We put out blogs, we put out East Florida Gazette articles, and all of these are accessible from your home. All of these archival collections that we continue to add to. So I cannot stress enough how amazing our library is. Everything that the Historical Society puts out there, the lion's share of the work comes from our library. These guys are really, really just doing a killer job, and I just can't stress enough how appreciative I am of them. If you can look at the bottom though, you can see that we are being visited from all around the world. So we're not just impacting our membership, we're not just impacting St. Augustine, but we are impacting much, much further than that in our sphere of influence. All that to say that we are, like Thomas and Nick said, we're standing in a good place right now. We've got some great things coming up. This is just our speaker series that we'll be hosting in 2024. But a lot of the things that the Historical Society does that people aren't really aware of what we've got, or what we do. But what we do matters. It's impactful, it's important, it affects our community. We have paper, we hold federal papers, state papers, local papers. We work with people like the Castillo de San Marcos. We hold their archival collection. We work with the counties, we hold the court records. We hold things like property cards. We actually hold about 20 years of property cards that you can't get anywhere else, and which have actually saved our residents thousands of dollars in impact fees. So what I'm trying to put out there is that what we're doing really is impacting a lot more, and this investing in the society has paid off. You can really see that payoff there. And so I welcome our community, our partners, our members to continue. We just continue working with us, continue investing in the society with us so that we can do this for generations to come, that we can continue to provide these services. Again, in 2024, in addition to the speaker series, we've got some great exhibits coming your way. We're going to do one on the Gilded Age, and we are going to also do an exhibit with the photography of John Jackson, the photography of Lenny Foster. We are going to also, because it is an election year, we're going to have some fun with old political cartoons. Don't worry, we're going to take the middle road, but we're going to keep out there. It's really interesting how you can take political cartoons from 100 years ago and they apply today. So we're still in the same boat. And then we've got three major projects that I really want to invite the community to support us with. One of that is the library. As you know, if you've never been to our research library, it's a beautiful space. It's not an ideal library space. And so we want to create a downstairs space that we can work with our patrons better, that we can make it more accessible. We know right now it's not ideal. Some people can't get to what they need to get to. So we are working diligently to make sure that changes very soon for everybody. The other project that we're going to work on is obviously we want to bring the Lombius House back to its pre-storm glory. We've got some great plans. Like Nick said, I've been working with FEMA and the city of St. Augustine. I believe that we're going to get that fully reimbursed. We're going to do a lot of mitigation. And, but what we're going to invite the community to help us with is the restorations of what we're going to call Catalina's Gardens. We would like to bring Catalina Usina. She used to live at the Lombius House, and she's really been credited with bringing one of the first ornamental gardens in St. Augustine. We want to do that again. So we're working on the structure itself. I can assure you we are going to make sure that that's in good shape, but we're going to turn towards the gardens. As they mentioned, The Lombius House is actually not owned by the Historical Society. It's a National Historic Landmark that's owned by the city, but it's under the care of the Historical Society. And so it can be costly. We use a lot of grant money, we use SAHS money, but we really want to bring that back to its pre-storm glory. So we're going to focus on that as well. And we're also going to do something in March that I think is going to be a lot of fun. General Hardin, he used to live at the Tovar House. It was his winter home, and he would throw soirees. And if you're familiar with the Tatler, it's kind of a glorified gossip column. It gives all sorts of details about some of these parties that were thrown at the Tovar House. So we're going to do a fundraiser in March, and we're going to call it Hardin Soiree. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. We'll invite you all to join us. And we're going to do that so we can do some book restoration about some of our historic books down at the library. So those are some of our 2024 plans that we've got going. And then, of course, we have the Herschel Shepherd Award. And this year, I can't be happier to announce that we are going to present the Herschel Shepherd Award for Excellence in Historic Preservation to Dr. Tom Graham. We will do that in May for Historic Preservation Month, so we'll keep you posted on all of that as well. But that's all I've got for you. And now for the main event of this evening. Let me just state that up here as you Okay. David Nolan moved to St. Augustine in 1977. From 1978 to 80, he worked on the first official survey of old buildings in the ancient city. He is an original founder of the nonprofit Anniversary to commemorate the civil rights demonstrations, or CORD, and helped bring national attention to St. Augustine's civil rights struggle. He has received numerous honors, such as the Governor's Points of Light, coveted in the coveted Adelaide Sanchez Award in 2018. He has made extraordinary contributions as an author, teacher, lecturer, historian, and activist, and we are very fortunate that he calls St. Augustine home. Can I get a warm welcome for Mr. David Nolan?
Talk to you today about something that is even older than I am. And that's David Shores, which is about to celebrate its 100th birthday. And its history is checkered, to say the least, but fascinating, certainly. And I was glad to see on the way in Beth Bowen's wonderful book about the Bridge of Lions, which also includes architectural drawings of the original buildings on David Shores. And then the very nice DVD that was made more than a decade ago, interviewing old-time David Shores residents, at least one of whom I see here with us tonight. Welcome, Pat, who is now 90 years old, and an ornament of St. Augustine. So let me talk to you a little bit about the background of David Shores, because everything in the ancient city has a prequel. And back in the Flagler times, there was no David Shores. There was just a big mud flat out there. And in order to get there was no bridge. There was a ferry boat. And the ferry boat was called the Myth. And the local wag said, well, it was called the Myth because once you had ridden on it, you wished you had missed it. And they thought of it. Finally, in the 1890s, they built a bridge, a wooden bridge with a kind of turnstile in the middle of it. And it was private enterprise. It was the South Beach Railway, and it would take you out, not to the mud flats, which were still no attraction, but beyond it, the Lighthouse Park, and then beyond that to the South Beach Alligator Farm and Museum of Marine Curiosities, which advertised that one of their exciting exhibits was a barrel of petrified pork. And then it expanded over the years. In the early 20th century, we got a trolley line that would eventually take you from Lincolnville and North City and take you on across the bridge and over to not only the lighthouse and South Street, but also beyond to a 20th century improvement called Chautauqua Beach. About 1913, the Methodist Church put up for bid around Florida who was going to give us the best deal if we would build a summer Chautauqua to train Sunday school teachers. And we won here in St. Augustine, and the minister of the First Methodist Church down the street, Mr. Fletcher, was the force behind it. And so the birthplace of what's now St. Augustine Beach was a hotel built around a courtyard there and several cottages, a few of which still stand. But the last remains of that hotel are now on Davis Shores. They're the roof of a house on Zaratoa Avenue because it was torn down in the 1980s, and General and Mrs. Charles Willis salvaged the tile roof from it and built it into a new home they were building on Zaratoa Avenue. So it's one of several last remains that are on Davis Shores, older things than Davis Shores itself. In the 1920s came the Great Florida Land Boom, and I had a wonderful time writing about it in 50 Feet in Paradise. My wife said I chuckled all the way through writing that book because there were so many scamps and scoundrels and stuff, and yet in the long run their dreams came true. And this was true of Davis Shores as well. And I had great fun trying to track down the various figures of the land boom. And D.P. Davis stood out because this was a time when most people were from out of Florida, but D.P. Davis was the Floridian who rose highest and fastest and got richest and fell most completely down in the course of that decade there. And he had started out, once he became successful, you couldn't believe anything that was said about D.P. Davis. Honestly, when I think of him in terms of contemporary real estate people, the name that quickly comes to mind is Donald Trump. Yeah. With D.P. Davis, stories are good. How much truth there is in any of them, I don't know. You know, it was always a case of making a lot of money and then losing a lot of money. World War I, he figured that the soldiers who were in the military base in Jacksonville wouldn't like military food, so he set up a hot dog stand outside, made a fortune until the war unfortunately ended. And afterwards, he always called himself Colonel D.P. Davis. He was a colonel on the staff of the governor of Florida, which I guess means you make a good campaign contribution. But, you know, he who served hot dogs during the Great War was always known as Colonel D.P. Davis. And then there was a story that as a young man, he had gone up to Gainesville when they had just opened the University of Florida. And, you know, the University of Florida is a little distance from downtown Gainesville. So as the story goes, he bought land in between and he subdivided it and sold the lots off, and that's how he paid for his college education. And the man who wrote the most recent book about D.P. Davis just snorted and said, "College education?" So I don't know how much there. It's part of the D.P. Davis legend. So, you know, it would be a wonderful novel, if not a wonderful history book. But he, in the land boom of the 1920s, it was such a mania that we were running out of land. And so being a religious people, we followed where God had left off and began to create land. And so the mud flat sitting over there was a perfect target for that. D.P. Davis had seen Carl Fisher in Miami Beach pump islands up out of the bottom, and went over to Tampa, and he had pumped up old big and little grassy keys there and turned them into Davis Islands. And started a collection of apartment houses based on the famous palaces of Italy. And then when I went to Florence, Italy, I looked at a building there and I said, "I've seen that before on Davis Island, Florence Palace Apartments." And it was such a success, you know, he not only sold all the land, he oversold it and had to give money back. And so this was the D.P. Davis who came to St. Augustine. And the paper just bowed down to him, the largest issue of the St. Augustine Record ever published, was the welcome to DP Davis issue. And it's just fascinating to see what everybody say, 1,000 times welcome to Mr. DP Davis, who has filled his beauty spots and gardens and all this stuff. But he was hot stuff here, and he was gonna do the same thing here he had done with Big and Little Grassy Peas in Tampa, except that he was gonna do it better. He was gonna spend more money in St. Augustine than Henry Flagler had spent in all of Florida. And that mud flat over there was gonna have a monumental Fort Marion hotel overlooking the real Fort Marion. It was gonna have a yacht club and a casino and a Roman pool, and every lot was gonna be either on the water or on a golf course, because he was gonna build a series of canals through it, and people just lined up to buy it. Pierre Thompson said his father, so many people lined up to buy it, but his father sold his place in line and more than once. So ways to profit from this land boom, and people fall onto it. And so David Shores again was a huge success. And the thing that DP Davis really excelled in was promotion. And this was the age of promotion. You know, phrases like ballyhoo came up in the 1920s. And DP Davis was no slouch in any of these departments, whether or not what he said was true or not. Now, how do you sell a mud flat to people? Well, it takes a lot of faith. So what you do is you build what it's going to look like and you show it to people. So he got an Australian artist whose work he had been impressed by, called Fred Lees, and he had him build a Davis Shores model. First he was going to put it in the plaza, but there was a lawsuit over that. So finally he just went a block down on Avalace Street and built a building. And there was the Davis Shores model, you know, and it was state of the art of the time, kind of audio animatronic of 1925. And things would move around. I don't know that there is anybody still alive who can remember the David Shores model, but I have known many people who would now be over 100 years old who remembered it quite well and said it was the greatest thing in town. You just wanted to go and see that David Shores model. And that would show you what it was going to look like, that mud flat, in a couple of years. And after you saw that, you could go out to the mud flat, because DP Davis took the old Charles Hamlin house along the bayfront there. You probably remember it as the American Legion building. It was kind of a late Victorian building. He had it redesigned by wonderful Jacksonville architects, Marsh and Saxelby, and stuccoed over and became Spanish. And it even had, you can see it with a little tower now, but it had a much more ornate tower before. It finally rotted and they took it down in the 1940s. But I always hope that they will restore it to the building, because it was a tower and a half, really, quite a thing to look at. And he had a fleet of buses, and the buses would take you across the bridge over the mud flat. And he had a place that you may remember as the Knights of Columbus Hall. And this was his sales office over there. And I've seen interior pictures, and there are all these tables set up to food, because, you know, that was a pretty long journey in those days. And you wanted to get something to sign the contract. Now, what did they sign on these contracts for Davis Shores? Well, I copied down a few of the things. There were to be no hogs, cattle, horses, or poultry. Get that out. There were to be no fences in the front of the houses. And there was to be no boathouse, dock, or structure over the water. And you can just look across and see how that has landed over the years. And then there was, of course, the other very common thing of the time. It said, no part of said lands shall be given, loaned, rented, leased, encumbered, or conveyed to any person of Negro blood. So this was, you'll find those things up in Fullerwood and Nelmar and other parts of town that were developed during that era. Not until 1948, the landmark case of Shelley versus Kramer, that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled those restrictive covenants illegal. Now, you know, I guess DP Davis gave us promotion and promotion and then more promotion. So for instance, he brought Will Rogers to things. And I spoke in the Alcazar on behalf of David Shores. And the city fathers and mothers of St. Augustine had just been given a gift by Avilés, Spain, of the outer casket of Pedro Menendez de Avilés. What do you do with it? You get it back. D.P. Davis was going to build an ornate mausoleum at the foot of the British Lions to house the Menendez casket. There was they used to have very popular commemorative half dollars that the U.S. Mint would put out, and they would sell at a premium to raise money for various things. And so they put one out for Stone Mountain in Georgia, which was being carved into a monument to the Confederacy. And those Stone Mountain half dollars were never worth very much. But when it went up for auction in St. Augustine, instead of bidding $2 or $3 for it, D.P. Davis bid hundreds and hundreds of dollars for it. And it was big news on the front page of the St. Augustine page. So this was D.P. Davis. Anytime you could have something that would make a splash, he was there splashing with it. And of course, David Shores, you know, if you think people complain about the Bridge Alliance, you should read the old papers about the complaints of the previous wooden bridge. You know, there's no end to those complaints. But it was going to be replaced by the most beautiful bridge in Dixie, the subject of Beth Bowen's book there. And that bridge cost 10 times as much as other bridges of the time. And, you know, it was a wonderful tale, and it wound up having the longest preservation battle in St. Augustine history and most expensive. And I see the president for life here of that effort. I will not be impolite and call her an SOB, but that's what the crew was like. A whole crew of former mayors were called the grumpy old man. And so that was one of the great fights of the 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century. But the most beautiful bridge in Dixie, you were going to get there was a little hitch, there was a toll on it. And I remember the late Leslie Stevens, who was an attorney here, told me that he had taken one of the original Davis Shores houses in settlement for a legal bill. And he said, and you really knew who your friends were in those days, because they had to pay to come see you. So what happened? It was a great success on sales. And some buildings were actually built, several apartments, a few houses. Of course, the sales office, you couldn't do without that. And they started on the yacht club, and got up so high. And then there was the foundation for what was supposed to be a 39-unit apartment building. And then things started to go wrong. For one thing, all of Florida had some kind of boom going, and everybody wanted to get building materials, and there were not enough building materials to go around. And it just blocked the supply system. We had an embargo period where you couldn't send building materials into Florida to meet all of this demand of all these developments of cow pastures and former turpentine camps and swamps and mud flats. So that stopped things, and the railroad said, well, we'll take care of this by double tracking the road, and they invested a lot of money to double track so they could bring all these extra building materials in. But you know, it was a kind of a mania. People looked at it, and then they looked at it, and you know, this might not be such a great idea after all. Let's do something else with our money. And this was a real crisis, because the way that they financed these things, they used to say, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you didn't really pay for your lot on Davis Shores. You made the first payment on it. And by the time the second payment came due, you were having these thoughts, well, I'll just write off that first payment and give up. And so many people did this, that when he was expecting millions and millions of dollars to come in, he had thousands and $1,000 come in, and he couldn't afford to continue, you know, that series of apartment houses based on the famous palaces of Italy and all, you know, so he was in crisis. And Davis Islands, which had been held up as a great success, he lost control of Davis Islands to Boston Syndicate. And then he was here at St. Augustine. What was going to happen? Well, there was all this, what they called silly slump talk. And that was it. And in September of 1926, a killer hurricane struck South Florida. And anybody who had any thoughts about getting into the Florida land boom said, I'm glad I didn't invest more in it. And he was going to lose Davis Shores as well. So what did he do? This was the September hurricane. In October, he booked passage on a luxury liner called the Majestic, which was kind of the successor to the Titanic, quite literally. And in mid-ocean, he disappeared out of porthole. And the newspaper reports that E.B. Davis drowns at sea. So, but Davis Shore is in good condition. No changes will be made. But within a year, it was in bankruptcy proceedings. And that was what happened with that. Now, this was all before the stock market crashed. You know, people should have learned from what happened in the Florida land boom of the 1920s that easy money is not that easy to get and not that reliable. But they didn't. So all the real estate salesmen from Florida just went off and started selling stock until that collapsed too. And all of the things fell down on, you know, banks had expanded so they could lend money for real estate investments, that collapsed. Newspapers expanded so they could hold real estate advertisements. Our St. Augustine record building here doubled in size then. And then there were no more real estate advertisements. So one thing after another, it was a great object lesson for people. So along comes the National Depression, and what happens? You know, here's all of this stuff. These Davis Shores lots are worth 5% or 10% of what people had bought them for, and they're willing to let them go. And all the improvements they were promised, you know, sewers, sidewalks, tropical plantings, all of this. It wasn't a mud flat, it was like a sand now. It was, you know, you looked across at the pictures and it was all white sand that would blow away in a heavy wind. So you had a few urban pioneers who went there and stayed there. But in 1933, the St. Augustine Record in November 1933 reported that at public auction, Thompson Ryman Realty paid $2,600 for 5 buildings, 1,400 lots, and 900 acres. And in May 1935, they reported that Thompson Ryman had bought an additional 800 lots. Now, here Thompson, when he told me this, then added 2 words. He said, plus tax. Paul Thompson tells me the figure was probably closer to $120,000. And it's now 90 years later, and the Thompson family still has some of that property. You know, it's been a good long-range investment, but boy, it was rocky along the way as well. I keep incredible clutter. But I have files on all of the various things I've worked on, and one of the things that was in there was several pages of notes on a tour that Pierre Thompson gave me back in 1979 with unexpurgated opinions of buildings and people and all of these. It's just wonderful. And I'm always grateful to him because he pointed out all the original buildings and Davis Shores and stuff. But so here it was, you know, it was not going to come back anytime soon. And the Depression, not many people built. There are probably almost as few buildings in Davis Shores built before World War II as there were built by B.P. Davis. But then at the end of the war, prosperity returned. And Davis Shores, as the most convenient place to expand, became the post-World War II baby boom suburb of St. Augustine. And this is where that wonderful Davis Shores video is so good, because so many of the people there were people who had moved there as part of that baby boom. And one of the things that the late Mrs. Willie Lee Gouch said was, we wanted to get a school over here. There was no school on the island. And so we called a meeting and we had John Cruikshank, the superintendent of schools, there. And he said, you don't understand, you don't have enough children here to justify having a school. And Lily Gouch said, she stood up and said, if you give us the school, we'll give you the children. Many people realized I was about 9 months pregnant. I stood up. So that's one of the wonderful stories told there. So they did get R.B. Hunt School. It was kind of in the last camp of racially segregated public schools built here in St. Augustine. You got Murray High School and Webster Elementary School that were black. And you got R.B. Hunt School and some of the others that were white. So this was, the post-war. It's and for that time, it's kind of a case study in how do you build a community. And people who lived there at the time talk about, there were places where you could go and swim there. The shoreline configuration has changed. And things were at the one-time beach that are no longer beach. But there was an article in the St. Augustine Record in August of 1951, noting that the waters around Davis Shores were being closed for bathing. And it said, since all the collected sewage of St. Augustine is discharged into the surrounding waters of St. Augustine, this would make it less than an ideal swimming pool. Things continued. One of the wonderful resources, and I think, that the single most useful thing that could be done for historic research in St. Augustine is for the St. Augustine record to be digitized and searchable. I have my own index to it that I put together over the last 45 years on a box full of legal pads. But, if you could just go there and say, I bought my house from Mr. John Smith, and you look up John Smith, and you'll get his obituary and his marriage notice and a real estate thing about it, and you say, I live at 16 Cincinnati Avenue. You can type that in, up will pop everything that was ever reported in the St. Augustine record. I mean, people would be so far ahead if, the record would just go on newspapers.com or something where you could do that. It's the greatest untapped resource covering more than 100 years of St. Augustine history. But particularly in the 1950s, every Sunday, they ran a homes page, and they would have a picture of 1 or 2 buildings, often in Davis Shores, and say, this house is being built for Mr. Smith by Mr. Jones, and here is why it's located on this lot with this orientation, and here's what the floors are made of, and here's what the wallpaper is, and here's what kind of windows it had. It's like this is the kind of stuff that when we did the survey of old buildings in town in the 1970s, we would have given our eye teeth for. Everybody wants that information. Anybody who buys a house of that vintage would love to know. They may not do the right thing with it, but if they knew that this was an important feature of it and that was, they probably wouldn't be so quick to tear them out and destroy them. So a few years ago, they were doing a survey of Davis Shores. And I said, this is the greatest thing. Go back to these St. Augustine records and copy off all of these articles. And they said, no, we don't have time for that. We'll just fill out the forms. So, kind of there you go. But you really didn't learn very much from that survey that was done. Eventually, we got the first condo on Davis Shores, and it was designed by our first female architect, Leah Wells. And I looked back at an advertisement for it when it came out, and one of the selling points was that it had a concrete courtyard with no grass to mow. Different times, different areas. So, in one of the the apartment houses that D.P. Davis built, one of the original ones on Arpeka Avenue, had a woman as an occupant named Zelma Case. You may or may not recognize that name. She was written about by Marjorie Kinnean Rawlings, who described her as my friend Zelma. Because Zelma Cason had been the first person that Marjorie Rawlings met when she came to Florida. Zelma had met her at the Clyde Line steamer in Jacksonville and taken her out in the middle of nowhere to Cross Creek. And in 1930, Zelma was the census taker, riding on horseback over in that Cross Creek area, and she took Marjorie with her. And this was a great part of Marjorie's learning curve of what people in backwoods Florida were like. And so Marjorie wrote a book called Cross Creek that came out in 1942, and she has a chapter about the census taking and my friend Zelma. She took a copy, an autographed copy over to Zelma at this apartment house in David Shores, which is still standing. And Zelma did not like the description where Marjorie said Zelma is an ageless spinster resembling an angry and efficient canary. Sued for $100,000. That court case went on almost forever, all through World War II, and Marjorie finally won it. Or Zelma finally won it and was awarded $1 at the Florida Supreme Court. And Marjorie never wrote another book about Florida. So that was the literary event that happened there in that original Davis Shores. So what happened then in the end? In the 1960s, of course, the civil rights movement happened in St. Augustine, and Davis figured in that. In the summer of 1963, 4 young black men were arrested for distributing handbills on Davis Shores. They were reprints of an editorial in the Daytona newspaper criticizing St. Augustine's reaction to the civil rights movement. And these 4 young men, one of whom now looks like Father Time, James Jackson, and who was proud of having been arrested 19 times in the civil rights movement. But these young men were convicted of trespassing for distributing these leaflets, and each sentenced to a $100 fine or 6 months in jail. So this was the reaction to that. Now, by this time, the Anastasia Boulevard had several restaurants and motels on it. Of course, the focal point of the civil rights movement there was passing the civil rights law, which would outlaw segregated hotels and motels and restaurants. So when it did pass, one of the first places where that law was tested was in those places along Anastasia Boulevard. And the first reaction of most places was to observe the law and serve black people who came. And then the next thing that happened was people with Ku Klux Klan orientation went and picketed with signs saying, "Niggers eat here, would you?" And the restaurants closed back up. And so then it went to court. And so throughout the summer of 1965, usually in the federal court in Jacksonville under Judge Brian Simpson, you had this reaction to the civil rights movement. And one of the restaurant owners, he testified in that. And what he testified was, we were scared. You know, we closed up because we were scared. The Munson Hotel was firebombed at this time. And Mr. Grissom, who owned the South Seas restaurant, he testified on that. And I always love to see how things change over time, because in December of 2002, a group of us had just attended the funeral of Mrs. Catherine Klein, who had come to be known as the Rosa Parks of Florida, because we went to jail early and often because of civil rights. And we met after her funeral and said, we have to do something about this kind of lingering attitude that the civil rights movement was something horrible, that Martin Luther King was a monster who came here to to experience in Augustine. And the place where we had that meeting was the South Seas Restaurant. It's not David Shore. It's been torn down recently and is now a construction site. But I remember John Giannotti, who owned it then, and this had been Mrs. Twine's favorite place to go and eat. And he came out and they delivered our food, and then he bought each one of us one fried shrimp, because he said Mrs. Twine had loved his fried shrimp. So things change, history is not just one thing, it's one thing and then it's opposite and then something completely different and then sometimes it vanishes forever. So anyhow, you had all of these things happening. Now, what about now? We get ready to celebrate the centennial of David Shores. D.P. Davis started dredging, and what he called the largest dredging project in the world, because everything he did was like that, on Halloween in 1925. And within a year, he was gone. And for a long time, I can remember in the 1970s, if I would bring up his name, people would spit. I had a paper fortune back. I dropped out of high school to sell real estate, and he made it all disappear. But opinions change over time. So in 2002, a University of South Florida student named Rodney Kite Powell wrote his thesis on D.P. Davis and Davis Islands and Davis Shores. And he learned to his amazement that D.P. Davis's two sons were still alive. They'd never been back. They lived in California. They didn't know too much. One was 5 years old, and one was 10 years old when their father died. But he found them and he invited the family back, and they were treated like royalty. Family, here is the namesake family of Davis Islands. And so, over time, if you live long enough, attitudes will change. Wonderful thesis, and eventually it was published in book form. And he's one of the people that they interviewed on that Davis Shores DVD. Now, in the 21st century, we had another real estate boom, and one of the focal points of it was Davis Shores. And in an odd way, because in the old days, you wouldn't just buy one lot and build on it. You'd buy two lots side by side, and you'd make your house face wide towards the street. Well, when land values went up, you would tear down that wide house and take those two lots and build two narrow, skinny ones. And this was happening at a rapid clip in Davis Shores. And I threatened to ask Don Critchlow to stand up here and explain the proposal he had back at that time, but I'm not that clear. But eventually, what saved Davis Shores was not any of that maneuvering, it was the collapse of the economy, particularly the real estate economy, which overheated and did such things that when was it, during the 2008 election, the economy might vanish. So what would you do? What happened to all of these people? Okay. So I told you about the Davis family and how they finally come back. His children are finally gone now. They would be over 100 years old. But we do have that nice book that Rodney Kite Powell did, and it does touch importantly on our history. Now, the Fred Least model of Davis Shores that managed to sell so many lots for him, of course, that closed down in pretty short order. And the building that housed it became a poultry house, a bowling alley, and finally the Artillery Lane Playhouse, headquarters of the little theater here, until the 1950s when it was torn down so our first downtown shopping center could be built. The Ponce de Leon Shopping Center that had Woolworths and several other things in it, and it was designed appropriately by the colorful Miami architect Morris Lapidus, whose autobiography was entitled "Too Much Is Never Enough." And how about the Menendez casket? If you have never read James Branch Cabell's book, the first gentleman of America. You have a treat in store for you. James Branch Cabell was a well-known novelist from Richmond, Virginia, who was a winter resident of St. Augustine from the 1930s to the 1950s, and he wrote several Florida-based books then. And part of that first gentleman of America is the saga of his discovering that we had the Menendez casket in the junk room at City Hall, and his attempt to put it on a more dignified location. And it is James Branch Cabell at his very best. And the more dignified location turned out to be the Mission Nombre de Dios. And it's been moved around a few times there. I remember once it was next to the Coke machine. Stacked up in the dignity, but I think that had a better place. So, you know, that's the story. The Menendez mausoleum was never built. Davis Islands in Tampa became one of the most expensive places you could live there. There was one house built by Derek Jeter, the baseball star, and later rented to Tom Brady, the football player, that went for sale for $29 million. With another empty lot there that went for $10 million. So you can say that D.P. Davis had the last laugh there. You know, go with D.P. Davis for big, quick, well, not quick, but big real estate. All of the Davis buildings were designed by a very young architect, still in his 20s, named Carlos Schockel, who was from Texas originally. And he came here and designed the beloved Volano Beach Casino. And he designed all of the Davis houses and stuff. And he went on as a very young man. He lived to be a very old man. He died when he was about 9 in Miami. He was kind of the father of Miami's mid-century architecture. And I read an interview with a real estate agent there who said, our hearts skip a beat every time we learn a building was designed by Carlos Schockel. One of them was for sale for $13.9 million, and another was available for rent for only $30,000 a month. We have some of its early treasures here on David Shores. And finally, what happened to Marjorie Rawlings? Marjorie Rawlings made her last trip through Davis Shores on December 14th, 1953. She was taken ill at her home in Crescent Beach, and she came in through Davis Shores, down Marine Street to the old Flagler Hospital where she died of a cerebral hemorrhage. And her husband, Norton Baskin, her second husband, spent the next decade and a half living in their home at Crescent Beach. And then decided to get closer in, so he bought and enlarged one of the extraordinary houses on Davis Shores at 77 Dolphin Drive. And it used to be the biggest house you could see there from traveling downtown. But in recent years, so many mansions have been built that you can barely pick it out. But it includes, among other things, several fragments from Henry Flagler's mansion, Kirkside. You can go by 77 Dolphin Drive, you can see the front door from Kirkside. And if you go inside, you can see the black and white tile floors and fireplace from Kirkside. So it's one of the extraordinary places of St. Augustine, and right now it's for sale.
Yes.
For only $2.5 million. And the sign said 152 feet of water. And the advertisement says, build your dream. What a loss that would be for us. So I think I've kept you long enough on that, but Davis Shores is a subject of tremendous fascination. The architecture there is only going to become of more public interest. And I am so glad that the neighbors in recent decades have taken a concern about preserving. I hope somebody will preserve Norton Baskin's house there. And you know, drive through, I drove through the other day. You go 10 miles, you can cover every street in Davis Shores. I recommend that as worthy. Thank you.
Well, we had a very informative, presentation. Thanks very much. Say, I don't think there's anything else that we have, on the agenda for tonight. So I want to thank everybody for coming out and, promise to do more in 24. Thank you very much.